Hi, everyone. Welcome to another VITA Learning webinar. Today, we've got Mr. Felix Pages, extraordinaire. Everyone knows who Felix is. He's been around in the industry for a lifetime. He started even before I graduated from high school. Not to talk about age, Felix, but you know, you've got a lot of wealth of knowledge that you're going to provide everyone today. And I greatly appreciate you coming on and doing this for us. How have you been?
I'm fine. This is actually my very first webinar. And it feels a little different because I usually pick on everybody. And now I can't, but it'll be fun. I did a lot of research on the latest publications on dental zirconia, and I tidied up a few loose ends. And I have a much clearer picture of what we're dealing with than I did even just a couple of months ago. So
well, just imagine who's out there that you want to pick on and just pick on them.
I will. Russell Giordano is the first one. He's responsible in large part for my curiosity on zirconia. So whenever you guys are ready, I'll be more than happy to start.
So whenever you're
I put slide
whenever
number.
You're right. So you're saying that whenever you're right, it's Russell's work, but when you're wrong, that's your work.
No, the other way around, I think.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's kind of get going here. I'm going to let everyone know a couple house rules here. Today we are going to talk about the understanding the science behind proper zirconia framework fit through Sintering with Felix Pages. Everyone's phone is on mute at this time. If you'd like to send in a question, or if you see something on a slide, all Felix's slides are numbered. So if you see a slide with a number on it and you have a specific question on that slide, in your question box, in that panel on the right-hand side of your desktop, open up that question box and then type in your question. And if it pertains to a certain slide number, jot down that slide number and write that in, and then we'll go revisit that question with that slide. Q&A, of course, is going to be held at the end of the program. So as we go, send in your questions. The workshop will be recorded. So give us a couple of days to kind of edit out all of the kitting and so forth like that we do, and it'll be posted on the VITA Learning website, the YouTube channel, VITA North America YouTube channel, and other social media platforms as well. So, Felix Pages. Today we're going to talk about zirconia frameworks, how to handle them, how they are traditionally processed. And Felix, I can tell you that Felix has done a wonderful job about actually getting behind the science of zirconia, collaborating with many people in the industry to learn as much as he can about zirconia and how to process it. He processes it himself. He works with colleagues that go through the workflow of the milling and sintering, and then, of course, layering ceramics as well. So Felix Pages is a 1976 honors graduate from the University of Kentucky, Lexington Technical Institute. After graduation, he worked with the prosthodontic faculty at the University of Florida College of Dentistry and collaborated with Dr. Harry Lundeen and other members of the faculty. In 1978, Felix relocated to California with a company that used to be called Unitech, right, Felix? An old company that started it all.
Called Unitech.
Yeah, it's a separate division now, right?
Yes.
So the Unitech Corporation, he was a course instructor for VITA porcelains at that time. Of course, we had crown and bridge and we had dentures, and that was about it. Partial dentures and orthodontics, but no digital. The next year, Felix is promoted to the laboratory project manager for all new products. So if there was a product that was wrong, you can blame Felix. because he was the project manager back then. During the time, Felix traveled and taught courses in many parts of the world, has presented in many domestic and international meetings, clinical and laboratory, and others. Felix is a founding member of the ISDC. Tell everyone what the ISDC is. International Society
for Dental Ceramics.
Okay.
That was founded by Dr. John McClain.
And some of you may know that name, one of the founders really of ceramics, of how to handle them, how to work with it, and so forth. A lot of laboratory testing as well, right?
Yes, he developed the aluminous porcelain with the British government and also the glass ionomer cement. So he was a very clever guy and a good person.
And then Felix was also the first keynote speaker for the group. He was invited to speak at the first Quintessence Ceramics Symposium in 1984. He's also a founding member of the Claude Seaver Art and Experience Group. Among other recognitions, he's received the FDLA Crowning Achievement Award in 2011 for his contributions to the dental laboratory industry. Felix is currently a key opinion leader for VITA North America and the American Dental Group. So, hello, Felix. I hope all is well.
It is. It's going to be hot here today in Miami. It'll be 100 heat index, just like you guys out there. But I'm in a nice air-conditioned room, so I'm good.
All right, excellent. Is it humid this time of year in Florida?
It's always humid. It's always
all right,
humid.
So I've made you the presenter, so if you want to bring up and show your screen.
Will do. How's that?
Excellent. I see you, and we see your PowerPoint. So with further ado, I'm going to release this to you. I'll be in the background, Felix, but you are ready to go and let everyone know the great depth of knowledge. So thank you very much for doing this webinar for us.
You're welcome. If I get in trouble, I'm going to say, "Mommy, help."
Oh, is that
that's your cue to help me. Okay, well, let's get started. So, oops, what happened here? You are connected. There we go. I got it now. So I started working with Unitech Corporation in 1978, and we had a very strong emphasis on courses at the time because everything was manual. And we didn't have any of this fancy equipment, and I'll show you a picture of what I used to look like presenting. This is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And so that was the board that we used with chalk. We also had some slides, but at that time, to make just a simple slide with graphics, it was really not so easy. And we would have to pay lots of money and all that. And Unitech had it, but the lab was the ugly stepchild of that corporation. But we made it through, and I was very lucky to meet some very, very sharp people, which is what's good about the courses on a personal level, where you have someone come in and the next thing you know, your life can change around because you see somebody make a simple move, just like how to handle a brush, to apply porcelain or glaze, whatever it may be. It's always good to see other people do it. And of course, there's no doubt that I love what I'm doing, and I don't plan on quitting anytime soon. And so if you really love this business, I can't wait to get up every day and learn something new about it, because I'm the type of person that I'm not in a very comfortable situation if I don't know why I'm supposed to be doing something. And so if you don't know why you're supposed to be doing it, why are you doing it? And I've had partners in crime for a very long time. A couple of the prosthodontists I worked with, Dr. Clary, Dr. Horkowitz, and of course Russell and Bob Kelly, that I met when they were students, at Harvard University, and I went up there to do a couple of courses, and they were in there. That was crazy. And then David Haley, owner of ProLab Aesthetics, and Grant Armstrong, who's an Englishman who used to work with one of Dr. McLean's technicians in London. So it's a very close circle of what I would say very, very sharp people in my little sphere. Now, the first thing I have to say that normal full contour zirconia has nothing to do with what natural teeth look like. But the future is promising, very promising. And so let's look at a few teeth and let's see how lucky or unlucky we are. So when you see natural teeth like this, you see all kinds of little tiny things here and there. And if you just use a monolithic zirconia or one that's even pre-shaded and multi-layer, whatever you want to call it, the tooth sort of has to look like that zirconia. If not, you're going to have to do something to make it look like that. And there's all kinds of different things, texture, optical illusions. The colors that you see in teeth are created by light optics as well. It's not a physical pigment. So every time you move in and out of different light sources, the tooth changes color. It is a moving target. And there's some inherent properties in natural teeth that give it the look like they have. One of them would be, let's say, an opalescent look. You hear that word a lot, opal effect, and this and that. And fluorescence, which I'll get into in a second. But the opalescence type, whatever that word is, on natural teeth is produced by the small hydroxyapatite crystals in the tooth enamel that scatter white light and break it out into individual wavelength components. It's sort of like a Rayleigh scattering. So the tooth enamel has so many small, beautiful little hydroxyapatite crystals that it reflects shortwave light forward. That's the bluish light, and it allows yellow-orange or yellow-brown, orange-brown to go through. So if you've ever done a dental exam, you look in the mirror and you have a light on the outside, the lingual of the teeth all look orangey, looking yellow-orangey. If you put the light source inside, they look normal with some bluish in the normal shade, but the facial now gets yellow-orange. So the enamel is like an active filter of light, and it breaks it out into wavelength components. And of course, all of these things come in all shapes and sizes. These teeth belong to Michael Wolk in New York, a good friend. And this was at a photo course I did in Long Island, like the rest of the teeth. And if you're going to photograph to try to produce effects, you have to get close enough so you can see what's going on. I find that most dentists like to take retractors and have the assistant pull the cheek back all the way to their neck and the back and try to get these shots of the whole arch. And that doesn't give you any information. So you have to really close in. And of course, my photographic mentors like Claude Sieber, he used to just take 4 teeth at a time, and he called those information shots. And this is how you could see a little bit more detail in the teeth and all this. Now, if you think a zirconia block is going to look anything like this, this is why they don't really like to use for a single tooth, but for large reconstructions and bridges, you have to work on it a little bit if you want to hit that target. So the whole idea is what the heck is your target, and what are you going to use to try to match that target? So most of the time, there's really not much you can do except layer. If it's a couple of teeth or a single central or something like this, you have to use some type of layering material like VM9 or Lumex or whatever you use to try to get a little bit closer. So what I did is I started to look at reference material on dental zirconia, recent publications from 2015 to 2022, the ones that I haven't read already. I have like over 300 articles on zirconia that I try to read. Some of the funny stuff, the little math in there with all those squiggly lines, I have no idea what they're talking about. But Russell can tell you. He knows how to do all that stuff. I found this one that's interesting from the Scandinavian Dental Journal, Effects of Sintering, Temperature, and Duration on the Strength and Grain Cells of Zirconia. We know a lot about that already from Russell. And then you have all of these. This is a very easy read from Compendium, Zirconia Material Evolution, and I don't know what that is because I can't see it on my screen. but by Dr. Burgess from University of Alabama. And it's a really nice, easy read for everybody. Thought it was a very good little article. And then I found this guy, which is printed in 2018. It says fluorescence of thulium doped translucent zirconia. And I said, what the heck is that? And so this fella, Nakamura and et al., doped ZPEX and ZPEX Smile, which is a TOSO material that most people use for beautiful anterior zirconia, with this, and it produced a beautiful reaction at around 450 nanometers. So it has a very favorable reaction like the human tooth. You don't have to put that much in it. So they had some very good future projects at TOSO, which may include this. And I don't know that much about this, but I know that if it looks pretty good right there, I'm going to at least try it if they ever make a puck like that. And so the future is really bright to do this. Now this, I'm not sure where I lifted this slide, but I've seen it in like a million lectures from everybody. And I originally saw a laboratory in South America somewhere that published this, and it shows different light sources. So at the top you have the material. In the middle you have some type of color-corrected light, supposedly. Then you have fluorescent light. And then you have rear-lit all these samples, and you can see that a couple of these zirconia and the lithium disilicate materials, some of them, they just don't fluoresce at all. And then you have the Mark II blocks, which is still one of my very favorite materials to restore anteriors. And some of the, I've seen some zirconia that's trying to fluoresce, but I don't think we're 100% there yet. If anybody knows, let me know, because I've got a UV light, and it's a little bit, but not as much as we need, I think. Now, the next one is optical and mechanical properties of high translucent dental zirconia. And this was done in Korea, and this is a very interesting article, and it goes through a lot of the chemistry of the zirconia and all this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share all of these with Jim McGuire. After we're done, I'm going to email the captions here, and then you can look it up. They're free publications, so you can drop them. And this is another good article, different sintering times and the adaptation of monolithic zirconia crowns. And so I'll get into the fit and the fast fire and the slow fire and all that bit and experience that we've had. The next thing is the Shoup company makes the molybdenum disilicide elements for a lot of furnaces, the VITA furnace. And this is an extremely good resource for anybody that's firing zirconia in their laboratory. It shows how the contamination, et cetera, where it comes from and all this, and I'll get into that. But I will send all of these so you guys can, if you have a little itch to go research some stuff, you can download all these articles, and it's really good. So Shoup is the company that makes all these elements, and they're really one of the top companies as far as this molybdenum disilicide technology, and they make some really good materials, and I'll show you a little bit on that in just a second. So what is dental zirconia? There's a lot of them, and so typically what we have, and this is another chart that everybody uses, and I'm not going to make another one, but it's a really nice little chart. So it just says, hey, we have 3Y zirconia, 4Y, and 5Y. What I learned from a couple of these other articles and Russell is that some of these things may not be exactly 3 or 4 or 5. It might be 4.1, 5.2, give or take, whatever. And that's why there's so many different pucks with some different properties. And then it really becomes interesting when you're trying to pick which one is going to work the best for you. So a lot of people don't even pronounce this thing correctly. They say, well, I'm doing zirconium frameworks. I go, I don't think so, because zirconium is a metal. So zirconia is the oxide. Anything that's like IA, from a very generic standpoint to me, alumina is aluminum oxide, yttria is yttrium oxide. So it's basically a metal at an oxidation stage, and that's what a lot of mixtures of these guys impart wanted properties for the dental zirconia. If you look at a typical, this is a TOSO, some type of aging resistant zirconia that they made by firing it lower. You can see all the stuff. This is a 3Y zirconia. The particle size, look at this, it's 40 nanometers. That's ridiculously small, which tells you that there's no way that any of these things, if they're polished nicely, will never wear the teeth, because they're much smaller than the hydroxyapatite crystals in the tooth enamel. Now look at the yttria content, 5.2, give or take 0.5. So it could be from 4.7 to whatever. Hafnium, aluminum oxide, or alumina, that's to stabilize, makes it a little less water, more water resistant. Silica, which is hardly nothing. Iron is nothing, and no pigment there. And so the density of these things is 6, blending strength is 1200. And most of the time, when you look at the real research done by a lot of the schools, they never reach the strength that's published by some of the manufacturers. There's always a give and take there. Now, if you look at this periodic table of the elements, all of these guys, titanium, zirconium, hafnium, et cetera, are transition metals. And so is yttria. And you see they're all cousins, they're neighbors. So they're all very, very similar, and that's why they work well together. So zirconium is a very, very soft, pliable metal, comes from a few places on the planet. And when you mix it with oxygen, you get zirconium dioxide, which is zirconia. Yttria is yttrium with oxygen. And you know that one, you sandblast everything, but there's different forms of that. So you have to think of what the metal is and what the oxide is. So don't say I'm doing zirconium crowns, because it just doesn't sound right. So let's see what's happened with some zirconia. Early zirconia problems, you had early failures, veneering porcelain and delamination, debonding from cement, marginal ridge chipping and cuss tip chipping, fractures when adjusting occlusals with high speed when you covered it with a porcelain, loss of low or high fusing painted glazes, which is always going to happen, low temperature degradation, which is called LTD, specifically on some of the 3Y zirconia, the framework zirconias, and those are the ones that we used to cover with porcelain. And I'll go into a study on the aging of these things. And so basically, they were influenced by hydrolysis. I learned that from Russell the very first time I saw him speak at the Florida Dental meeting. I said, this stuff actually drinks water? That's amazing. And then the thing that always stood out to me is I can make a pretty decent looking crown out of zirconia, and it looks on the model and everybody's patting themselves on the back, and you put it in the mouth and it looks like it's glowing in the dark. And that's because of this double refraction or birefringence. So if anybody has seen this, this is why your crowns look bright on the in the mouth and looks pretty good outside the mouth. I think the light's coming from all areas. I'm not sure, but I know that the birefringence is always there. Now, it's double refraction, so the material has two different refractive indices, and what it's doing is it's bouncing off the grain boundaries as well as the little tiny crystals, and that causes a tremendous amount of light scatter, and it looks brighter. Now, the bigger the zirconia crystals grow, let's say if you analyze the 3Y zirconia with really tiny little guys, and then cubic zirconia, which is larger, the cubic zirconia doesn't have this as much as the original zirconia. That's why they call it anterior zirconia. or whatever. I was actually invited to Mongolia, okay, for some place that they make pretty decent pucks in some place in Mongolia. And I said, I'm trying to cut down on Mongolia. No, thank you. I'm just going to stay here right now. So where do they make all this stuff? So the leaders in zirconia technology, as far as I'm concerned, and most lab technicians, I keep hearing this name Toso, which is a company in Japan. And it was called the Toyo Soda Company from 1935, and in 1980 something, I can't see it there because of the little screen I have. And then Saint-Gobain in France. And that company's been around in 1665. And they're the ones that used to make all the beautiful dishes and coffee cups and teacups for the French kings. And they do a lot of different types of zirconia. And Russell told me about these guys too. I don't know how many puck manufacturers there are. I don't know. There's too many. So Toso in their website has this really interesting little flow chart that tells you this is where you get the zirconia, you put this stuff in here, then you get this, then you dry it, then you cook it, then you mill it, then you spray it, and you do this. And what they've done is they make little tiny spheres, and I'm assuming this is what they sell to anybody that wants to make a puck. And my guess is if it's a sphere, it doesn't lock in. If you crush those little spheres, there's no way you can unpack it. Those things would be so tight. But spherical shape, you only have one point of contact, so that way you can dispense the zirconia. That is my assumption. I don't know that, but it's fairly logical. And here's the super translucent zirconia powder, which they call ZPEX and ZPEX Smile. And you can see there where the little stars are. You reduce the alumina, it increases the translucency. You increase the yttria, it increases the translucency. And so they've made some very, very good improvements on the look of the zirconia by doing this. And then also, they reduce the monoclinic growth for better aging. So these are more, quote unquote, saliva or moisture resistant than the original framework zirconias. The other thing they did is that they lowered the firing temperature on these, and this 3Y zirconia on the left was fired at 1300, 1350 in the middle, and I believe 1500 on the right. And you can see the lower you fire it, the finer the grains in this material, and it reduces the hydrothermal aging. And so that's the one thing. If you go way high, you can increase this. So basically, this type of zirconia from Toso has superior hydrothermal aging versus the original zirconia. So all these things are getting better, and hopefully we'll be at peace with zirconia for a little while. And so what these guys did, and actually I believe Jerome Chevalier did this immersion in 140-degree water, and it accelerates the aging. And so you have different situations where you can measure the depth of the monoclinic phase transformation as well as the aging in the mouse. So it's sort of like simulated aging, for lack of a better word. And then you see they increase the light transmission a little bit in D65 light, which is sort of color-corrected daylight spectrum. And you can see the translucency of the ZPEX materials is a little bit higher than the 3Y zirconia. So definitely the aesthetics improve, and I think a lot of puck manufacturers use this material, but there's just so many that I don't have a clue. I'll tell you a funny story. I have a friend that wanted to do zirconia with electrophoresis, like that machine that what's his name made, where you dip the coping for interim, and this magic current is supposed to deposit the zirconia. I got him the information and the phone number for Toso, the guy I spoke to once, asking questions, and he wanted to order some zirconia to see if he could do this electrophoretic deposition, which I'm sure he could, and the gentleman in Japan asked him, how many tons would you like to order? And he goes, I just want a little bottle, like 50 grams, because we don't sell that little. So I don't know how many puck manufacturers there are, but it's like chasing rabbits. You just can't do it. Now, VITA Zirconia offers a very nice line. I don't know if they're going to continue the YZ, the original one, which is the 3Y Zirconia, but Jim will know that. And then you have the VITA YZ HT, you have the ST, which is a 4Y Zirconia, and the XT, which is the real translucent one. Now, I have a funny story to tell you. When these guys from Germany that run the company came over here to meet me, I said, why did you call the XT the most translucent? He goes, what is wrong with this? It's extra translucent. I said, okay, let me explain it this way. Have you ever heard of Extra Man? He goes, no. I said, how about Superman? He goes, of course. Okay, so Superman is the best, the biggest. So super translucent is more translucent than extra translucent. So I've always told them that the ST should be the 5Y and the XT should be the 4Y, but there you go. I had to convince him with Superman, but it's still the same. And if you see these 3-point bend tests, they actually are pretty decent figures. The one here, the original YZ, it says 1200 megapascal and a 3-point bend test. The HT is the same. The ST is 850 and the YZ is 600. Now, with any of these, and we can ask Dr. Giordano later, if you sandblast these with aluminum oxide or air abrade it, whatever you want to call it, you can really do a number on the XT and the ST. So you have to use very, very low pressure if you're going to do that. When I do a lot of these crowns, I actually have baking soda in my blaster. If I have to take the little stay put, the putty, whatever you want to call it, I have one that's a little tacky. And I blast it out with baking soda, and I put a couple of those silica gel bags in there to keep it nice and dry. But don't over sandblast this because you can weaken it quite a bit. Any of these, not just this one. Now, when you look at CAD/CAM materials and you look at the way they make the pucks, if they don't really have a good system to fabricate the pucks, you can have porosity all over the place. And I remember in the beginning, not with the VITA Zirconia, with others, we would be milling a bridge, even a small bridge. And the next thing you know, this thing would break in the milling machine. Now it could be feed speed, it could be milling strategy, but a lot of times we would find a big pore somewhere in the bridge. Doesn't mean, that it's going to always fall in the connector area. Who knows? But that's the problem when you use questionable pucks and you're not sure where they come from or how they're made, and it's very hard to dig up that information. It's unbelievable. And so these little guys, you have very uniform grain structure, and of course that's some pores. And I actually sent Russell a couple of crowns that had like a little white thing inside, and I wasn't sure what it was. And I think he's got one of his students working on it, several of those crowns that have like little white spot inside where it looks like the zirconia didn't cook or color or whatever you want to call it, didn't sinter properly, and, let's see what happens. So the thing you have to understand is if you have a really well-made puck and the particles are really nice, it's very hard to mess up a fit because the shrinkage is uniform and doesn't have anywhere to go. Now, if you have a huge bridge and you leave an arch like that and really ram it fast, you can have some distortion. But we always leave a bar connecting the back part of the bridge, and we center it with the bar, and we cut it later. And so I'm not so concerned about the fit on any of these things anymore. They've got the milling strategies down on a lot of these machines, and I mean, I have nothing but admiration for the people that write that software and do those barcodes. Oh, it's amazing when they do that. I don't want to compete hand waxing any of these crowns that they can do with some of the software. They're really incredible. And if you mess up, you just pop another one out. Boom. And so marginal integrity is good. You just have to be careful when you finish. And you don't, if you have a bad die, a bad optical impression, a bad model, whatever, that's where the problem is. You have to stop it. If you have a bad impression, don't do it. But the labs will sort of like create a margin, or send it back to the doctor and says, look at the where the diamond marks are. That when they stop, that's the margin. I mean, come on. And so you're buying $250,000 worth of equipment and you don't even know where the margin is. That's pretty sad. And so the doctors have to get a lot better in their scanning or whatever they do to get a real clean, accurate model for the lab or a digital impression, whatever you want to call it, where it's nice and clean and you can really see the margins. And of course, that's one of the most important things. And so if you have poorly made pucks, the shrinkage is not as good and the distortion can increase. So how do you finish this stuff down anyway? I was told never to use a silicone polisher, and these abrasives are supposed to be polyurethane polishers. I don't like those shapes. I don't understand what the heck those things are up there, like a football. I mean, I like something that is controllable, just like I don't like sintered diamonds because they keep changing shape. But I would use something like in the middle, those little ones they need a cylinder, something that if you want to take a uniform thickness little by little off of the surface, don't get this fat thing and then all of a sudden you use this real polished thing up top. I don't get that. Sorry, but I just don't use those things. And so most of the milling machines now are so good that don't really need to finish a lot more. And you have to be really careful. You have to kind of think of 30% in your head if you're finishing something down and miking it to see how thin you can make a margin or the shoulder. You got to be really careful because that thing's going to shrink 20 to whatever percent it happens to be. And you're going to see right through that area if you get too thin in the green stage. And there's some really good materials now where they're diamond impregnated wheels that you can really polish. You don't see any sparking coming off of those to finish the already cooked zirconia frames and do these final little touches. So this is what these are meant to be. And that white part really makes it smooth. So the smoother before you cook it, the smoother after you cook it. Now, one time I would take these. I have like a little ultrasonic that's for jewelry that we have at the milling center in Tampa, USA Dental Mill, with Pedro up there and Anna. And we would put these guys in there just for a second and you'd see this dust fly off. I don't know if that's good or bad, but we would dry them really well. And then we don't leave any of this little crusty zirconia. If you leave it inside the margins or if you're polishing and that stuff gets inside, it's going to cook and it's not going to fit right. It'll scratch a little bit and you say to yourself, what happened here? And it's because you've got a lot of dust flying. And wear a mask. Dr. Fauci says wear a mask if you're grinding zirconia. So how do we color this stuff? In 1999 or 2000, ESPE patented this color for coloring zirconia. And of course, all of these things are mixed and then you paint it on, etc. So ESPE, I think that patent's probably finished by now, but if they keep adding to it, I don't know if they still have to pay 3M or ESPE for whatever, but I always like to know where everything's coming from, and you can call 3M and ask them, and they don't really know anything, or they won't tell you. So most of the shades are in zirconia are achieved by using some type of metallic oxide that imparts certain colors, and they mix this with I don't know what, and then you paint it on here. And I got this from the United States Department of Agriculture, where they actually put these rare earth elements, and they actually test to see where the water is flowing in watersheds and erosion. And so then they go back and look at it under certain color meters, and then they can tell where the water is eroding to and how bad it is. But that was a lot of the really good stuff is going right back in the ground. Now, what about these coloring liquids? These are the same as the Zircons On liquids, and they have some with acid, the original ones for the 3Y zirconia, and then they say all of these are water-based. And I've tested not just these, but a lot of them from every company you can imagine, Origin and Apsera, and the list goes on and on and on. And the water-based always tests a little closer. It's like 3 or 4 or 5, which is still acid. So it's mostly water, but it still has to have a little acid. And they're pretty safe, though. I drink one in the morning. So this is the type of oxide that are used to produce certain colors. So iron makes like a brownish, orangey, whatever. Erbium is this purpley looking thing. The pink ones, neodymium, I can't pronounce half of these, cerium, terbium, manganese, and praseodymium. So all of these, depending on what colors these guys want to make in these bottles to color, come from metallic oxide. Now, how many people still use these? A lot of the really, really top technicians still use color in zirconia on white zirconia because there's just no way to get these big cases that these guys like to do with the pink and the tooth color at the same time. I mean, that's for young people. That's not for somebody like me. But they have to paint the pink and the tooth color. And so they can make concentrated colors to increase the chroma. So a lot of times if you don't color enough, or if you have a pontic next to a real thin abutment, you're going to see color differences. And then they have these companies that sell you like water in a bottle, and you paint the pontic first, and then you put the coloring in there so it doesn't suck in so much. And if you don't use enough and you over contour, you shape it, and then you see the white come out. So it's a learning curve. When you come to pre-shaded zirconia, they use the same stuff to color it. I've never seen anybody make a puck, which would be kind of cool one day to see, but I've heard stories of how they do this. And so I have a little chart like this that somebody made, an Origin, I believe, years ago. It doesn't look as pretty as it does now, but you put your crowns with the shade, and then you have jars that are made for each shade, and you just dip them in there. That's what we used to do in the past before the pre-shaded zirconia, and we still do this, except we can paint it with a brush. Now, when it comes to the bigger cases, you can immerse them or paint them. This was the only way we did. Now everybody wants to use pre-shaded zirconia, but if you have some really interesting teeth to match on smaller units, you may have to go to painting because there may not be enough shades available. Think of the 3D shade guide. Who wants to buy 26 pucks with 4 or 5 different thicknesses to nest a crown that's tall or short or whatever? I mean, it is incredible the amount of pucks that you have to have. And so a lot of times they'll just use a white pucks and then they color. And that way you can increase your shade fidelity on a lot of these other crowns. I mean, a lot of these other shades that are not made at the moment. And so we put that in the jar and leave it there for a little bit and cook it with these supports on it. A lot of times the distortion is when the software calls for too small of a sprue or whatever. It's always better to just kind of, give it a little kick, make it a little bit thicker, and always have to be careful when you have a bunch of ponics next to abutments. This one's got 3 ponics in a row. On the left side where you're viewing it, be patient. Left side, there's 3 ponics in a row and 2 very thin abutments. I don't know about that one, but I just took the picture. So tips for shading zirconia, you can look at all of these very hard work that these people did at Zircons On and at VITA. where you paint one coat, two coats, whatever. And I like to call them avatar teeth because they really look like that movie, all those beautiful colors. When we started this is up at the milling center. These couple of my friends and PJ over there working the computer, and Dr. Mark Davis retired. We did hundreds of crowns trying to get the color right. So there are people out there that are actually willing to sit down and go through like 20 pucks and figure out what the heck these things are going to look like and write down a little book of what you have to use for each one and what thickness. But nobody wants to work that hard anymore except dummies like me. So we started with acid-based liquids. This is the reduced one, but look at this, the light, the drying light. So a lot of the MOSI-2 elements, the molybdenum disilicide elements and furnaces were destroyed because the labs just would not follow the directions on drying this stuff. I mean, you got to really, really dry it. You can't just say, I would get called, can I just go like 20 minutes or 15 minutes? Name that tune. I can name that tune in 5 notes. I can name it in 3. Name the tune. Destroy your furnace. And so the discipline that you have to have for somebody that has to rush a case out the door, you got to stop them. You got to hit the brakes and say, look, we can't do this that fast. This has to dry. And that's why the appreciated zirconias are so much easier to deal with, even though you don't have as many colors. And since most of these things are all bleach shade or A1, it's really, what can I say? So Zircons On was really one of the first to come up with all of these beautiful charts, and these technicians that work for them are really incredible people. Now, if you look on the top, you can see this flat base. They fire these things up on that base, and that stays on there till the work is finished. And so you could stay all day doing this, and you can create some crowns, but it's never going to look as good. If you have fewer teeth to match, it's really difficult. But they are exceptional. That whole group up there, is my hat's off to them. And that looks just like that movie. We speak about scanners and softwares. We have so many out there. I mean, it's a sort of the same scanner with different software, and this company has an arrangement with that company, and like Straumann gets all these scanners from I don't know how many, and then they sell it to a doctor, but they can only use that care system or whatever. And so when you walk into some of these places, you don't know what you're going to run into, and it's just too hard to keep up with that unless you're just an IT person that really knows or works for a company that services all of these things. You gotta, just like a Sony TV and a Samsung or whatever, you gotta know how. It's like a veterinarian. You gotta know the inside of every little animal. Doctors are just human beings. That's it. Veterinarians got to know a lot more. And so as we speak, every detail of all these softwares are being improved, as well as bettering the workflow. I remember when we first got the Cerex scanners in the lab, oh my God, I was the teaching lab. If I wanted to change the shape, I had to go back and start over. I couldn't just back up a little by little, and all that got better and better as we go. And now, I mean, it's pretty easy. That's what everybody's looking for, designers. You can't find them. So let's look a little bit on framework design. The most critical thing, I mean, everybody talks about incisal chipping and the whole business and all that. That's fine and good. But back then, the thermal expansion of some of these zirconias weren't exactly a perfect match to the porcelains, or vice versa. And so if you didn't flow cool right, if you just wanted to get it out the door and you fast cool it, I mean, I saw a guy trying to cool down a full arch going from one hand to the other. You know how labs do that. They toss the crown until it cools down, and they rub it in their hands. If you haven't done it, you haven't done enough crown. And so the patient's in the chair. So what I like to do is I have to evaluate the occlusion. And some of these people that are older, their occlusion's all chewed up, and then all of a sudden they need a bridge. You have to have minimal, just a little bit. You can have all or none on the incisal edge. If you're going to veneer, you have to create enough room so that that veneering material has enough thickness to produce strength. If not, just go ahead and do the whole thing where the incisal edge is actually in zirconia, which is what everybody wants, because that way they say it's never going to chip and all this stuff, and that's fine. What you're doing is you're limiting the aesthetic possibilities of that case. If you're going to do full contour zirconia, that's fine. Here you can see where we started with a bridge on the top left, and then I told Graham to cut back more because we needed tissue porcelain in this bridge, and then we try to figure out what's going to hit here. If these are centric cusps, I prefer to do the centric cusps in zirconia, especially on somebody that the bite isn't too stable, and leave it as this. This guy was actually pretty good. And so we ended up with this design on the bottom right, and I'm going to just go over that, but it's flat. So we have clean, sharp finish lines where the zirconia and the veneering material meet, but the rest is rounded. You want everything nice and round. Porcelain likes to go around a curve. It doesn't like to go around a corner. And so when I go to labs and I look at the frameworks, I mean, I could shave with some of these things. I think I sent Russell a picture of me shaving with a metal ceramic framework with a press. They were so sharp. And there's no way that the investment, the wax and the metal casting or the zirconia can reproduce such a fine incisal edge. So a lot of the problems with fit is the preps are too sharp. And then the computer says, I can't get in there to make such a fine edge. And what it does is it beefs it out in the lingual, the buccal, and up the incisal. And you say to yourself, why is this coping? It looks too long compared to what I did. And when you try to cut it back with a little diamond to give yourself room for porcelain, you poke a hole in it. That was the standard. So I used to give the doctors a burr. And I go, listen, the prep has to be much bigger than this. You can't leave me an edge. Just flatten it and round the corners. If not, the machine overcompensates and the fit's never right. The other huge problem is if the machine gaps or you use too much of a cement gap, when you try to seat the crown clinically, if there's too much space between the intaglio surface of the crown and the occlusal table of the prep, the margins always engage first. And I remember when I started this, there was a doctor that would want to use die spacer, and then the crown, what he would do is he would seat the crown and he would get a chopstick and hammer it in. And I'm like, why are you doing this? He says, because it's not seating. And I said, the reason it's not seating is that the margins are engaging before the crown is fully seated. And of course, they didn't believe me, but the problem is he was cutting into the root. And I have a few crowns that were hammered into natural teeth. I have a collection in a jar, which I just don't understand how something like that can happen. If someone just has a little bit of care. And so rounded corners, sharp finish lines. And what we try to do is we try to get the zirconia to touch anything that's tissue. If we can't, we put a little, if we have to do pink porcelain, we mix a little bit. I'll show you a couple of cases. And then I always finish up with a little clear material from the Lumex, which is absolutely translucent. And when it touches the tissue, you get sort of like a contact lens effect. But you do have to mix your porcelains, tissue porcelains with clear. So let's go to the next one. Here's one right here. Look at these beautiful crowns behind this bridge. So we're doing these slowly, little by little. And this is the zirconia with a pink tissue. I put little veins and stuff in there. And it's not the best work, but when you're cranking it out, you do what you got to do. So when you're selecting and designing finish lines and things like this, you have to say to yourself, what is the target shade? And how translucent are these teeth? What zirconia are you going to use? 3, 4, 5, a gradient or a layered one, like some of these that have 3, 4, and 5 wide zirconia in the same puck, where the 3 zirconia is by the tissue, like the gingival area, and then it goes down to, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4, and then the incisal area is really translucent. I won't name any names, but most of the stuff that I've read on the research is that there's tension between the layers, so you have to really be careful with those. And the second thing is that you have a very, very opaque 3-wide zirconia on an area of the tooth that's usually soft and translucent as it emerges from the tissue. So I don't get that concept. And so what are you going to do? You're going to make the incisal edge in porcelain or zirconia? And I let if it's a bruxer and things like this, I don't like to have too much free porcelain overextending. It doesn't matter what it is. And there's just too many questions to ask. How many zirconias are there? What if you have a bridge that has a really long canine and a real short bicuspids right next to it? How are you going to nest that? How are you going to get that color the same when you have a tall prep or a tall crowner next to a short one? I mean, that's the difficulty. That's sometimes where we have to make the decision. I'm going to use the white zirconia and paint it because there's no way that I can nest this in all this mess. Tall next to short. I mean, that's really what you have to think about. And so the doctor has to prepare the patient in the treatment planning and let them know. Don't promise them the moon because, it's very hard to what do they call it? Over promise and under deliver. So you need to under promise and over deliver. So here's a case we did, I think last week, where Graham, we did provisionals. You can see in the bottom left, you can see a shadow and outline. We do all these in PMMA, very similar to the shade that we're going to use for the final product. So we use like a 1M1 or A1 or whatever, and then we try those in after the design. And then if the patient likes that shape, we can modify it a little bit, and then we rescan it, and then we cut it back for ceramic if we're going to do that, or for full contour if we decide on that. And so the thing you have to watch out the most is if you have different thicknesses, let's say you're doing full contour, and you have a really thin lateral versus a fairly thick central or canine next to each other, and sometimes the tooth positions, you want to do ortho at the same time. You have different thicknesses. You might have 1.5 millimeters on one and 0.6 on the other. They're not going to look the same. So you have to prepare the patient for that. Or if the tooth prep is dark, that's another issue. So there's a lot to think about before you choose a material that could be a very translucent zirconia versus lithium disilicate or lithium silicate. All of these things have to be done depending on what target you're trying to reach. Let's look at more complicated cases here. So the patient presented with a denture and had a bunch of implants in there, and they weren't all pretty. And we decided to do what's called a Kgenix IC framework. So we have a titanium, which is a lot of bone loss here, implants up to the nose, and the doctor took a copy of the denture that he came in with, but the patient wanted to change this a little. So the doctor picked the teeth on the upper left slide, which is a T66 VITA denture tooth. We put that in there, and I told the doctor, I go, the papilla is way too long for that. So my guide with this case, which is like 5 or 6 years old now, is I always try to make the papilla length and width as natural as possible. And so I told the doctor, I said, I need to bring the contact surface a lot higher because you're going to have a papilla that's literally 3 feet long. So Graham and I got on TeamViewer and we beefed that up a little bit. And then the doctor said, let's just try something. So he went and got a provisionals done, PMMA, to try them on the framework. And so you can see on the bottom right how those things came out. So the pink would be really to the contact. So whenever you have a lot of these teeth, the selected tooth or a library, you need to look at the length of the papilla, which nobody ever tells you, to see if you can do it. Because if the teeth are too tapered, you're going to have a papilla that's 3 feet long, and it just doesn't look natural. And so that you have to watch for sure. And that's a beautiful fit on those IC frameworks. That company is called Kgenics, and they have to do their own zirconia and everything. If not, they don't guarantee it. So once we fixed these, we did zirconia crowns, and I layered them with a little VM9 porcelain on the anteriors, and then we set them in the model, and then we waxed it like a denture. And then ProLab takes these, and we do a Ivo, what is it, Ivo, whatever the pressed denture thing is, Ivo cap, I believe. And so I told David, I said, listen, use the fiber, and he didn't use the fiber. So here you see the crowns, fairly clean looking. You can see the resin at the top. And then you can see the fibers on the denture characterized lucitone or whatever they used. And then he profusely kept apologizing. I said, well, we're not going to make you take them off. Now, when you look at this case, you haven't seen the implant placement, but sometimes they really throw a curveball at you, and this is what happened. We want to be able to remove and take this on and off. And so we did a splint, because that particular implant was going to go right through the facial of that lateral. So what we decided to do was temporarily cement those, and when he comes in for a checkup, we can take this out and clean everything really well. And of course, since this is a denture base, sometimes you might get a little line or discoloration between the crown and the resin, and then we can clean that up. But I'll tell you what, it's holding up really well. So I did a couple of other ones where I actually tried to etch the crown right there and put a silane, like a bonder, so there wouldn't be a gap in there, but it's just too much trouble for that. And so this system works really well when you have difficult situations and you don't want to do a full contour zirconia framework when your implants are all out of whack, because they'll break. So this is a typical of what we do with the frameworks. If we have to do larger cases where you have to have pink, we use the white zirconia. And they're quite tall because the distance of the throw for these things, and we try to break the case up. And we left the incisal edges in zirconia. We got the occlusion established using PMMA crowns. And so with that said, that's how my frameworks look when we're done with them. So I don't have to put a lot of porcelain in there. And then the question is, what is micro layering or macro layering or whatever you want to call it? All I know is I don't have a lot of room to do the porcelain, so I try to get the color of the zirconia as close as possible to the final shade. The second thing is, what type of patient is it? If it's a cancer patient or someone that has some type of physical impairments, movements where they cannot clean their teeth the right way, they maybe are water picking or someone has to help them, we don't go for this super interproximal, whatever you call it. If you've ever pumiced a denture or pumiced a bridge and the pumice gets stuck in the interproximals, that's where the food's going to get stuck. And so what we try to do is have fill in a little bit more so that you can rinse it away with a water pick without having to do a lot of maintenance because the patient's not able. And a lot of these people that are on glyoxide, which is basically peroxide gel to sort of foam up, that's how bad they are. But in this particular case, we had to use the white with colorant, and it looks very nice. Now, you see this is glazed, the fits everywhere, and then I polish this with rubber wheels. But I try to fill all these little areas in with correction powder, and it may not be the best looking interproximals, but I don't care. That patient has to be able to clean. So my target is making a decent looking restoration on an older patient that can't help himself very much. And there you see the characterized tissue that I do using the VITA VM9 material, in this case, mixing the G4 with the window. And with the Lumex, you can use the 234 with the clear bottle 181, and that gives you a beautiful tissue. And you have to use 2 or 3 translucencies, and then use a little bit more of the concentrated color where it's deeper, a little lighter around the tissue and all that. So you just have to look at a few slides of human dentition and tissue, and you can see where you have to put what if you really want to do a nice job on those. And then these are radiographically tested. These are 3 pieces you can see. And here you can see I don't have the tissue material in there. And here on the bottom left, there's a little iffy spot right there, but that's because the bridge was moving a little bit, but we made sure everything fit perfect, and we x-ray everything before and after the porcelain. And this is what it looks like in the lady's mouth. The papilla is fairly normal size, and you can see that it could be a little bit more open in the interproximal, but she can't clean them very well. So this is why we do this. And there's the side views. Now, when you have a framework that's that wide, like we did here, okay, think about this. This has zirconia from mesial to distal everywhere, so that the natural tooth has dentine in the center and it's wrapped with enamel and it's quite translucent, where there's unbacked enamel. That's where you get the play of light with the bluish and everything. So whenever you do a framework with zirconia that's beefy, okay, for strength or whatever, you're limiting yourself to the aesthetics. Remember when we used to just dip a coping and build the whole thing up in metal ceramic? If you had pretty decent support, those things would stay in there forever. It's amazing. But with this stuff, you have to remember it takes a long time to cool, a long time to heat up. So let's go past this. Let's look at the heating elements and the sintering of zirconia. Molybdenum disilicide on the left, silicon carbide on the right. Silicon carbide, people say they are better, and mostly 2 people say that's better. I don't care. This is a mostly 2 heating element from a VITA furnace. This is a destroyed molybdenum disilicide element from a VITA furnace. This is where they put acid in there, and that molybdenum disilicide means it has a nice glass coating on the element, the heating part. The bulkier part, it goes into the furnace. So that glass doesn't like acid, of course. It dissolves it. But if you take it through what they call a regeneration bake every once in a while, you can extend the life of these things. So the firing temperatures and time will affect the look of the zirconia. Deteriorating MOSI elements will cause discoloration. The quality of your MOSI element and the higher the iron content is very dangerous. And I recommend the Shoot Hyper MOSI 2 elements that has a very, very low iron content. So if you look at this company, they have 3 different MOSI elements and they all have iron. But look at the Molycom Hyper on the bottom left. You see that has very little iron in it. That's the parts per million, as you can see on the top left. And the standard MOSI elements, which you may have from less expensive furnaces and things like this, because these things aren't cheap, they have huge amounts of iron. So once the glass gets all cluttered, you start to see little discolorations. And so we're going to see how serious these people are. So let's go. There's a zircament furnace, and if you want to sinter your zirconia, you want to make sure that it's firing properly. Now, the VITA furnaces calibrate every time they fire, and I haven't seen one that's way too far off. So what I did is I really heated this thing up to like 1600 and I don't know what it was, and I deliberately shrunk the heck out of this so you could see it for demonstration purposes. This is what they call a ferro PTCR ring. That's a process temperature ring, and they're used in a lot of industries. I have a guy that makes coffee, bakes coffee right down the street from the lab, and it smells wonderful. And I went over there hunting this thing, and I saw ferro rings there, and I'm like, what is this guy doing with ferro rings? Does he have a porcelain oven in here? And what he has to do is he has to calibrate the roasting ovens perfectly so he won't burn his coffee or not cook it enough, whatever you want to call it. And so these ferro rings are used everywhere in every kind of industry. It's a German company, and they make the rings for everybody. This is the micrometer that VITA has with a kit that they have. You measure the outside diameter is 20 millimeters, give or take, and then you can fire it. I put it in the beads, but the instructions from VITA says don't put it in the beads. I don't care. I put them in the beads, and I try it, and they were almost the same. I don't know why they want the beads, but whatever. You have to follow the directions of your particular furnace. And then these rings come in all shapes and sizes and colors, thin ones, smaller ones, blah, 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 depending on what you want to do. And if you notice their micrometer, it has a support on the bottom, where this one does not. So you have to take 3 or 4 measurements on this one, whereas you only have 1 measurement on this one. And it also has software that you can hook up to your computer, and you keep it on there, and it tells you every time that the app comes up, you program in, it tells you the shrinkage, and you can do it once a month, once every 2 months. And if you have a big lab and you're a production-oriented lab, you should do what my friend that cooks the coffee does, okay? So you should get the ferro rings and a micrometer with an app on it so you can maintain 3, 4, 5, 6 sintering ovens, however many you may have, all in line. So you don't say, well, how come this one did this and this one did that? That way you can have a lot better production. Now, they come in different colors and different thicknesses. The ones that we use for zirconia, depending on the zirconia, you're going to use either the MTH, which is a cream color, or the HTH. And then sometimes some of the zirconias are low enough where you could use the green one, which is called the STH. So when you're cooking these, you just take an outside measure after you cook it. You take the outside measure again, and they provide you with a sheet of paper, and you go to the final dimension, let's say 19.4, and you look down and it says, aha, this thing cooked at 1500 degrees. You may have had it set at 1510 or 1540 in your control board or whatever, and then you can say, okay, I'm going to compensate because this thing is off by 20 or 30 degrees. And sometimes it makes a difference on some zirconia. So here's the VITA one. It goes through positioning of the ring without beads, and then you line it up to where you're measuring the numbers. Then you do another one, and you do another one. So it's a little bit more time-consuming, but it works. Now, what you have to do with these beads, and some people are using trays now with like a fiber tray or something, whatever, and they all work. You just have to make sure that they're nice and dry. You don't have any moisture in there and you don't want a whole bunch of beads because they'll sink in there. And depending on the interproximals and the size of the bead can get in an interproximal, and when it starts to shrink, it'll break the framework. And you say, why did this break? Because a bead got stuck in one of those interproximal connectors. So you don't want a whole bunch of beads in there. And then you just run it up according to your program. And that's another one. You could have 100 different programs. Now here's one where you have a long span bridge, and you can see that it's still connected for whatever the software left. And of course, if you do the speed firing, I like to slow it down a little bit more. Some people like to do these things like in the fast fire, and the bigger it is, I don't like the fast sintering. It does not affect the strength of the zirconia. Sometimes it can warp it a little, depending on the zirconia. You have to be careful. The thing that I find is that most of the people that try a fast cycle on zirconia, it's not as translucent, which is contradicting what Toso said, because they're firing at 1350, and they say that they get a nice translucency. I don't know, but you have to deal with the zirconia that you're using in the lab, or the labs are cooking for you. You really need to know what you're using, if it's a 3, 4, or 5 wide zirconia, and the limitations of each one. And so let's go through this. That's another thing that you have to think about. Which firing cycle are you using? White? Are you using pre-shaded? What's the size of your restoration? So if you have a little skinny little crown, it'll cook a lot faster than a big one. And again, like all the articles say, the strength doesn't seem to be affected, but the look does. So this is what these guys did at Shoot. So they did 3 different, a bunch of samples, and here you have the hyper standard, Molycom, and the standard, and you can see the discoloration on the standard 1800 degrees. That really turned that's from the iron. And the Molycom Hyper Super Clean, it literally didn't change. This is the uncooked zirconia on the left and cooked in the middle. All the right is cooked. And so it's better to use these hyper ones because of the low iron content. Now, the other thing they did is they said, well, let's find out what the heck is causing discoloration. And so they took samples of zirconia and they mixed it with ethanol, like an alcohol, and some oxide. And they cooked it at 1500 degrees, and they put a drop of each oxide in these little samples. And then they cooked it, and you could see chromium turned a little greenish. Molybdenum, which is one of the main ingredients in the heating element, it doesn't do anything. A lot of people are saying, oh, the molybdenum's getting out there and it's changing the color. No. The iron oxide from a cheap element, moly doesn't discolor. And sometimes the glass, if you look, I saw a videotape where someone had looked at the inside of a furnace when it kicks on, and the elements, I think it was Shoot, and you could see the glass blowing off when you do the rapid fire cycle. The glass from that covers the heating elements, it exploded. Just like if you spit water out of your mouth. Little tiny shards of glass, and then they fall onto your zirconia, and you can see little shiny spots on it sometimes. And of course, you can cover it or not cover it. You just have to work out your temperature. So the next thing these guys did is to analyze what was contaminating it. They used a 24-bit colorimeter, and then they measured the spikes in the red, green, and blue range, and then they were able to determine what was causing the discoloration. And there you can see on the red level, you have iron going way high there. But like we said, the thing that discolors the most is the iron and the glass shards that are coating it if you don't take care of your heating elements. And all this is in the book that I showed you about the Shoot. So you can get that PDF online, and everything that I'm showing you here is in there, and it's fantastic. So what they did is they used another sample inside of a furnace that the heating elements, they knew they were going bad, and they were stressed out already with a destroyed silica layer. So what they did is they heated it up, but they used a closed stagger on the right and an open stagger on the left. And there you could see the difference of the discoloration. And so that's basically what happened. So if you are thinking that your heating elements are a little foo-foo, you can cover it. And you may have to adjust the temperature a few degrees or just change your heating element, whichever comes first. So what are the problems with zirconia? Firing methods affect the look and strength, excessive grinding, is very dangerous, especially on the 5Y zirconias, the cubic zirconias. They can pop out really a lot. Fast cooling of the zirconia structure is not good, very dangerous. So you have to let those things cool down by themselves. I have, like, when I build porcelain on some of these things, I'm using Lumex mostly now because it only fires to like 760, 770, and it doesn't take 2 hours to cool before I can do anything. And excessive clinical adjustments on the occlusal table, you got to be careful. They have to be polished. Now, recommendation sintering cycles from every company that I've seen, they have a different one. And some companies say, well, from 1 to 5 units, you can do this. From 6 to 9, you can do that. Greater than 9, you do this. And it's like, okay, man, I just do it one way and that's it. Even though I'm sure this works. You know, if you got to get the work out, what are you going to do? 1 hour, 2 hours difference? I don't know. But I'd rather be safe than sorry. Now, this other company, I believe this is from Origin. I'm not 100% sure. But you can see here, it says lower temperature will create a deeper shade and lower translucency. A higher temperature will create a lighter shade and higher translucency. But it ruins the aging characteristics, which is the same as the Toso study. So you have to really look at your zirconia and see how close it is to the shade gun when you fire it. If you're using a pre-shaded zirconia, you have to see what it is. This is a VITA ST, the super translucent, and these are like 3 crowns. This one is an A2, and they come out pretty darn good. I mean, you know. And so when you do that, you say to yourself, all right, I'm close enough. All you got to do is maybe give it a little kiss with a stain here and there. And you can see the anterior most tooth is going to be layered. Now, if you fire high fusing porcelains, you can burn out the color oxides. Every time you bake it, the shade's going to get lighter, believe it or not. And so the framework gets lighter. And so if you're veneering it and you have a veneered unit next to a full contoured unit, try to use a lower fusing porcelain so you don't go above 850. And that's why some of these newer materials are lower fusing. They don't change the color of the framework. So let's go over the stresses. You have the initial powder, the initial yttric content and distribution, and additives can be wrong. Forming, pore distribution can be wrong. Sintering and duration can be wrong. Cooling rate can be wrong. Not enough isostatic pressure. Grinding and machining. Sterilization. Some of these people were sterilizing frameworks before putting them in the mouth, and that in a hydrobath accelerates the aging. So what happens is on the 3Y zirconia, you push too much, and Russell's the first person I saw doing this. You push it, and then it's like a bunch of people in the room, they hold the door back so the hurricane won't blow it in to stop the door from moving or a crack from spreading. And that changes from tetragonal, which is a stable zirconia structure, to monoclinic, and it produces a 4 to 5% expansion. And then that throws off the thermal expansion around the margin. So the very early lava frameworks and stuff like that, you'd get them back from one of these labs, and they would have a real shiny margin on it where they were grinding the heck out of it. And that was changing the expansion. And then they said, well, you know what, porcelain's flaking off around the margin, and this is no good or whatever. And that's because they weren't even really doing a wash bake, but they were also changing the structure of the zirconia by grinding on it too much, trying to get the margins thin. So you pay $250,000 for a milling machine, and it leaves your margins fat. I don't understand that. So this is what happens. You grind it, water goes in. It's called grain pulling, and then people gather around the door to push back. More water comes in, and then the particles start coming out, and that weakens it. That's called hydrolysis. Now, the good thing is the cubic zirconia, the 4 and 5Y, they have more cubic than the 3Y, and it doesn't seem to be affected as much by hydrolysis, which is a good thing, but they're not as strong. So you sacrifice strength, but you have less risk of hydrolysis. So anytime you do any of this, you have to grind and reshape very carefully, nice and slow. Don't go at it like a bat out of hell. And so when you're going to bond veneering porcelain, you have to really remember that zirconia takes forever to cool, forever to heat up, and forever to cool down. And the bonding temperature needs to be a little bit higher than the firing temperature. In some instances, as much as 80 degrees. In the Lumex material, we only go to 800, and we get a decent bond. And then I just dust it with aluminum oxide so I don't have a real shiny thing. Let's show you something here. If a zirconia isn't hot enough to receive the porcelain will ball up like a hot glass on the surface. And if your heating rate is too fast and you want to get it over with, the liner can lift and so can the body porcelain. And I do this. I take food coloring. I did this deliberately. So I would get a couple of crowns where this thing was lifting, and I had the porcelain too fat there. And of course, I didn't sandblast the surface, so you can see it's too shiny. And then I put the food coloring in it, and it just migrated. Look how far it went up, almost halfway up the crown. So that porcelain's lifted. You know what that's going to do later in the mouth? It's going to pop off. So you have to go nice and slow, and don't have too bulky of porcelain on top of this, and don't leave that shine on the coping after you do a bonding layer on it. Has to be no sheen. Now, should you glaze, polish, or both? We know bacteria hate zirconia. So any zirconia that's going to engage the tissue, especially like the emergence profile from an implant to the clinical crown, I never glaze that area. I always polish. I use cardinal polishers that are really good, and they're simple, and they do a beautiful job. So they go from coarse to fine or whatever, and they're not that expensive compared to some of these other people. And so also, this is another problem. This is a test 3-unit bridge on a VITA sagger, and I put glaze on it. I just slopped it on there, and I put it to dry. And this was 8 minutes right on the door of the furnace, and the Pontic never heated up enough to dry the glaze. So that just tells you that you have to be careful when you fire these bridges with big Pontics and you're just building porcelain. You got to slow down. You have to preheat that. Leave that bridge and the porcelain idling, like at 400 or 500. You're using Lumex, the glass transition temperature is 550. So you need to go at 400 and make sure that bridge is heated up enough so that Lumex, when it fires, it won't coil up on itself and it'll go to the zirconia. That's what happens for not preheating it enough. That's the thing with zirconia, and then cooling down the same thing. The final temperature should be around 760 or 770 in a visual check where you have a little bit of a sheen on the porcelain. This study was done by Gladwell and Christensen years ago, which they did glaze on a Emax crown, I believe, and another one, Emax Cat, and then on zirconia. And the glaze started to wear off after a couple of years. And so what I do is I'm trying to get Graham to do a microscopic finish line all the way around the occlusal table so I can put facial glaze, but I don't ever glaze the occlusion. Then I tested all the glazes and all the colors. And so what I did is I started at 740, 750, 760, 70, 800. At 800, I was able to get the stains, the accent stains, and the glaze. The glaze melted at 740 beautifully, but not the stain. And so if you're going to color the zirconia and glaze it, you need to fire the zirconia over 800, but below 850. And then you can get those accent plus glazes to melt. You can also mix a little LT glaze with those, and you can do it all in one shot. So I did a lot of, this is nothing. I've got like 40 more of those stupid things. So here you have the A, B, C, and D chroma stains on the right, a little violet, a little blue, a little white across the top, and then the tissue, the pink color, and then you can see the glaze, how it took a shot there. So still we need slightly lower fusing stains, or you can mix in a little LT glaze with those, and it'll do a wonderful job. Sometimes we have to deal with really difficult patients that can't do anything. They're not going to be around for very long, and you want to treat them so they have the best life possible. So we do these cases that are more characterized. Sometimes the design of the frameworks, they're very sensitive. Sometimes these have to be removed, and to do stents. So we make a matrix, and we try to follow what this patient's been comfortable with. Then we do this, and we do a really high polish on the tissue area. And that's basically pink colored zirconia on the bottom with a little glaze, okay? And that's super gingival, but that patient can only clean with a water pick or something like this. And she doesn't have any feeling in the lips or anything. So we try to do the best job possible for her. And you can see that this, it looks pretty decent. She can clean it. And there's no way we can go all the way down to the tissue because it's, the implants are super gingival. And so she can clean that easily. And that's what we try to do for some of these people. And then to finish here, we do polishing zirconia with these little wheels. What I do is I use a very dark stain from the original Accent stain kit. It's called Fumo 3. And I paint it with water in some of the grooves, and then I take a dusting brush and take it all off. So where there only goes into the little grooves. And then we glaze the outside of the crown, you see, and because we know it's going to wear off in the bite. And then at the end, after we make sure that nothing's too high or whatever, then I polish with 2 or 3 of these in sequence to produce a really, really high luster. And I think Russell's working with these, and we're trying to figure out what the best sequence is and the best surface finish that we can get on some of the zirconias with the least amount of effort. And so that, I'm sure one of his people is working on now. So anyway, I finished just in time, didn't I, Jim?
Yes, you did, and thank you, Felix. Appreciate
you
going through everything very thorough. And
yeah, that's what I do every day. Except
well, you're
today.
An everyday technician.
That's right.
So I am going to.
In a dental office, it's a lot different, but you learn more when you're in a dental office because it's impossible. I'll be honest with you. I have seen almost every crown that I've ever done in my life and go in the mouth. And I drive a lot just to go see a patient. You don't make money that way, but you know, what are you going to do? I can't do it. I don't know how some of these people send out the work and they go back to the lab and they go back and then they go back. God, I can't do that. I take a crown and I finish it and we deliver it.
You got to do it the right.
Lose a crown. Sorry?
Do it right the first time, right?
Well, I try. You know, just because I can take a shade. Sometimes I take a shade like 3 weeks before. I'll take a photo of it with my phone now, and I try to remember. I can't take a picture of the patient's face because sometimes I don't want to do that because I can't remember what it is. But I take and I script, you know, write some stuff down or whatever. And, you know, the bigger the case, the easier the shade. They're not going to do it. I mean, what are you going to match? So when it comes down to single centrals, that's when I sweat a little bit. And just because I get to see it doesn't mean I'm going to nail it. And, I mean, I've seen people from all over the world, and, I mean, I've seen them where they have 3 or 4 crowns, the same crown. I mean, what are you doing with all these? And one guy made one just a little bit different value, you know, things like that. So he would try these in. I can't do 4 to try one in. I can't. I do one and that's it. Now, one thing I do, if any of you have the ability to mill a VITA block, what I do is I take, and I'll show you that in maybe the next webinar or for shade selection or whichever one it is. I take a VITA block, a Trilux preferably, and they melt at 1200 Celsius. So you can put whatever you want on it and it doesn't move. And what I do is I buy Lee press-on nails that they look at me funny when I go to the store, but who cares? And then I mill those out. I scan it and I mill it out. And a fingernail is like a half of a crown, like a veneer. And so I have a few shades, and then I put the try and paste in. I'll tell the assistant here, put that in there. And you can actually go just slightly under the gum, and I can see what the crown's going to look like before I start. So the whole trick to making some of these matches on single teeth is to improve your predictability. And unless you know what the material is going to look like I've got Lee press-on nails milled with Trilux and the regular VITA blocks at 0.5, 0.7, and 1 millimeter. And then I say, okay, this looks good with this try-and cement and that. And this looks good with this and that. And so sometimes these really difficult people, which it's fine if they made their mind up what shade they wanted. That's the most difficult thing for me, that they want a bleach shade, which I've done 6-unit anterior bridge in a bleach shade, and the rest of their teeth are A4. I don't get it, but it's what they want.
That's right.
And so if I have to match that single tooth, then I got to go. I got to pull out the nuclear bombs. You know what I mean? I got to try everything I can to nail it. And it's not easy taking a picture and sending it over the internet. It sounds good, but if you don't understand color spaces that a monitor can produce or the color spaces that a camera has, what are you going to do? By the time you get to the receiving end, those two monitors aren't calibrated and they may not have the ability to reproduce the color space. And so that's a very risky thing. And so the best thing to do is if it's a single tooth, you should have a technician come in or do a couple of crowns. And of course, if you don't use a 3D guide, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And so that's what I normally use. So anyhow,
well, let's get to some questions first. Just everyone that's given me questions about CE. We will send you the CE information through the your registration email. So that will be processed this week and first part of next week. The webinar has been recorded, so give us a couple of days. We will post that on our websites, the VITA North America YouTube channel. If you need to get a hold of your local rep in your area, here is the information. You can also get a hold of myself or my colleague, Paul, here at the help desk. There's our phone numbers there. This is the VITA North America YouTube link. It's got all of these various webinars on there that you can go ahead and look at. There is the help desk again. We have many webinars with Felix coming up, a couple more with him. We also have some remote denture and porcelain courses. The remote workshops are 3 days, 2 hours each day. So it's a 3-part series just to give you enough time to move through different techniques, and then you can still go about your day, make some money for yourself. And then we pick it up either the same day, the next day, or a week later. But it's a 3 2-hour workshop throughout. And you can find further information on that at vitanorthamerica.com/courses. Here is Felix's information again. So those of you who need to request anything, you can contact him or our help desk. And then we'll go ahead and get some questions going. So one of the questions, Felix, is can you change the translucency opacity of zirconia by changing the high temperature or climb rate?
The high temperature affects it more, but each zirconia is a little bit different. So you have to be careful. And there's so many out there. That might be a better question for Russell at some point. but I know that if you melt it too high, like Dr. McLaren, for instance, he cooks everything at 1600. He says that he gets the best look at 1600. Now, I don't know. I try to stick to mostly the manufacturers, and it really depends on how thick something is. So if you're asking a question like that, you say to yourself, well, how thick is the crown? If it's a 0.7, the high heat is going to affect that a lot more than, let's say, if it was a Pontic. And so you're probably going to get a greater shift of color on a super thin crown. And remember, a margin has three surface areas: the margin itself, the inside, and the outside. When you're sintering zirconia, the abutments are wide open, so they're going to heat up a lot faster than, let's say, a Pontic will. Once it reaches a certain temperature, it's all going to be the same, but the amount of material that has to, quote-unquote, transform or whatever, and at what depth is that, I don't know the answer to that question. But typically, it will get a little more translucent, and you burn the color out. So it'll get a little bit lighter.
So that was another follow-up question. You kind of mentioned it with that one slide, where there are not, my zirconia, if it comes out too opaque, does it mean I'm not high enough? If it's too translucent, am I too high?
If it's coming out of the sinter furnace too opaque, or if it's coming out of let's say a porcelain oven, a sinter?
No, sintering furnace. You had mentioned on the slide also.
Probably too low.
Yeah.
It's probably a little bit too low.
All right.
If they're using a closed tray or an open tray, or and that can affect it. You could go 30 to 40 degrees either way. Seems to be a magic number where not much happens. So let's say if your furnace is supposed to be at 1530 and it's at 1560, it won't change that much. If it's at 1470, it won't change that much. But if it's off more than that, you can tell a change in the zirconia. That's in some of the literature. So I would say if it's coming out a little flat, it's probably because it's not high enough. Or you don't have enough soak time. You may have rapid sintered the thing and you haven't left it in there long enough. This is the thing that I tell the doctors all the time when they call me and they'll say, well, I like the paste stain. I go, okay. I said, why do you like the paste stain? You have to dry it for 8 minutes or more sometimes, especially on a Pontic, even more than that. And it takes forever to cool down. And so they're trying to save time by having a CEREC machine or whatever and knocking these crowns out, but they use the slowest drying times ever for paste stain. So a lot of times, I always like the powder stain better. That's just a personal preference. And if you use the normal liquid and your furnace can preheat a little bit, you can leave it there until everything is nice and white. And I go up with a drying cycle of about 5 minutes to acclimate the zirconia. And then depending on what I'm doing, if it's just zirconia, I go to like between 800 and 850. If it's veneer material, you have to put glaze on both, because if you have, let's say, an abutment with the Lumex on it, which the melting temperature is quite a bit lower, and so you could stain the Pontic and glaze it, and the Lumex at the same time. You have to slow the bake down, and then you can go to like 770, and that will take care of the Pontic, and it'll take care of the Lumex without overheating the Lumex. So if you try to go higher than 800 or so, because you have zirconia in a bridge and you have a couple of veneering material on it that's low fusing, you can really melt the heck out of the Lumex material and glaze the zirconia, but you'll over melt the low fusing material in a combination case. So I use the common denominator, which is the LT glaze, and then you can go to like 770. It's not going to hurt either one. And that's where I got the minimum, really nice, normal glaze. If it's just zirconia crowns, paint the stuff on there and go to 800. That's not going to hurt anything. So you have to think of what you're cooking and if it's a combination. Okay.
So you mentioned this earlier. The question is, do you sandblast the framework prior to layering?
I take if I put a bonding layer on it, super shiny, I dust it. I get it really far away and do that and just have it kind of matte. What happens is when you're layering and you have a really slick surface from, let's say, the bonder, when you're pushing with the brush, you can slide the whole buildup off. That's happened to me before. And if the let's just say a lot of people like to clean their margins up with water and a brush and make it really neat and all this. The water gets thin where the margin is. You heat it up and that material will lift off the margin if it's slick. So I always dust it. What you don't want to do is you don't want to sandblast the heck with too much pressure out of any zirconia, especially the cubic zirconia or the high translucent zirconia. You want to stay at 30 psi. That's why the Germans say 2 bars. And I told them, I go, if you put 2 bars here, people think you're going to go drinking somewhere. But it's like 30 pounds per square inch. And that is a light dusting. And then you rinse it, blow dry it really well. And then you can put your buildup on it, and it's not going to push off of the brush. So that's what I do. That's what most people do if they've got trouble.
So another one that you kind of...
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay. What happens is if you, some people like to put these big cases on a pillow tray with the porcelain on it and run it up. And what happens is the top part of the work gets hot. It needs to be up with firing pins. If you have a big pontic next to an abutment, you need to fill that up with putty, refractory, whatever you use, so that it doesn't heat up so much faster or cool down so much faster than the pontic, because that'll put stress on the connector. I had a beautiful bridge, and I just put it in a peg, and when it came down, I looked at it. I think Russell has it. I sent it to him. The thing split right in two, and I'm like, God. And it was a thermal crack because of stupid old me that I prefer to have everything lifted up so the heat can go around it. If you lay it flat, sometimes the top part of the bridge gets hotter than the bottom, and then you have a mismatch in temperature there, and that just causes a strain. You need to have the heat going around the whole bridge evenly. That's just a thermodynamic study of what happens in a muffle. Taller pins, better heat convection. Conduction's when you touch something. Convection's a convection oven, like an air fryer. And that's what a furnace is. And so you have to make sure that that thing is lifted up so that it heats up more evenly. If you just have it laying down, that's not good for me. Where you have heat coming from the top only, that's ridiculous. So anyway, okay, next.
All right. What is the best tool to use when contouring zirconia in the green stage? You kind of touched on it with those rotary instruments, but is that what you showed?
I use the Wagner instruments, but I shape them with a brush so that they're like flat cylinders. And then I'll take, I would love to have like a little rubber wheel, just a tiny one, to contour that if I have to, but I try to make a tiny little tool so I can get around the margins. And then I have a sharper, rounded disc that they have in there, rounded off. So sometimes when you design this, the interproximal next to a pontic, the margin is even with a pontic. Can't do that. So I open that up before I cook it. I don't like grinding that area after I cook it. and you have to be very careful. I know that years ago when we were debating whether you should grind green stage zirconia, Russell said that some of the studies, depending on what you ground with, you would contaminate a green stage, and it would interfere with stabilization, because you're pushing something in that beautiful zirconia that was just milled out by a carbide burr or diamond tip, whatever, and then you're grinding it with some rudimentary rubber wheel or something, because people used whatever they could in the beginning. And that way, you got to be careful, because you could do that too. That's why I was dipping it in an ultrasonic, trying to get the junk off of it and dry it. I'm an expert at imitating ultrasonic. So
that you are.
I just take one of those wheels and I shape it to where it's less of a point, and I do like a cylinder to do like a facial, a lingual. I cut one of those with a razor blade, and you can take the rest of the thing off, and then you just make yourself a little rubber wheel. And then they need a rounded one to sort of scoop in the margin. But like I said before, you have to be really careful when you do green stage zirconia, because remember, it's going to shrink. And if you take too much off, what are you going to mic it? You're going to mic it, and you're going to say, well, this is going to shrink to 5/10. So if it's 30% of the total, you got to be careful. If not, it's going to be so thin that when you cook it, you're either going to have a hole or you're going to have a wall that's almost see-through. So I don't like to reduce too much when it comes to that. I always make sure that the pontics on the bottom are more convex than concave. And then I open up between the interproximal next to a pontic. And usually all the work I leave with a little tiny place to thread a tissue, like a fishing line, and then I can't remember what they call it, but it's the what do you call it? A dental floss with a fishing line, so you can thread it on those difficult cases. And again, like I said, a lot of the patients that we see are older, and they have a hard time doing that anyway. So.
Okay, so next question is on the VM9. What zirconia liner do you recommend for VM9? What minimum cooling time do you recommend?
Well, a liner, depending on the shade, if it's thin enough, it's not going to influence the color at all, because it shouldn't. And you could actually even use the denting. Now, the liner is the fluorescent liner. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I mean, the VM9 line doesn't have per se a liner in the what people call liners. We use that wash material. We use it as a wash.
Right. Like McLaren fires the liner high for the first time for bonding, which can wipe out the fluorescence, okay? But then he goes back for a second bake that's a little bit thicker with the liner of whatever that shade is that he wants, and then he fires that to 920. You don't want to go above 920 on the VM9 liner. If you want to establish that fluorescence, you need to do the first wash higher, but go back with a real, a little more substantial one that looks like it. I'm always mixing a couple of liners because to match the shade. So the thinner your crown is, the more that your zirconia and your liner have to look like the final shade. So you need to mix like 6 and 1 or whatever combo is there, fire them up, and that way you can see what they look like depending on what zirconia you're putting them on. And so if you're using like an A2 zirconia or an A4 zirconia, you need a liner that's similar to that. And in some areas, you can put lighter or darker depending on the contrast that you want to create on some difficult single teeth. So if you have hardly any reduction at all in your margin area, you can go in with a liner that's a little bit warmer. Let's just say a 3M2 look versus a 2M2 look. And by the time you get down to nothing, the 3M2 will end up looking like a 2M2. That's why the 3D Shade Guide is so good for controlling this value in chroma in different areas, because you can just move to the left or to the right and compensate for too much room or not enough room. And that's really been the most helpful thing since that came out in 1997, is understanding how to use that shade guide. And unfortunately, that's been lost in the process, but it's really the best guide to do some of these tools. So the main thought is the thinner you are, the more the coping or framework and liner have to look like the final color. That's right. The key. I mean, I've done liner to make it look like dentine, fired high, and then I just put enamel on top. I don't even have room for dentine. If you can get the liner to look like that, that's fine. It's just, you know, it's like, what do you use? Opaque dentine or base dentine or regular dentine or whatever. And it's all thickness related. So I fire tabs all the time, like a 1 millimeter thick VM9 dentine looks like a 0.5 millimeter of VM9 base dentine. So if I don't have room, I'm just going to use the base dentine. Because if I use a regular dentine, it's not going to produce any color. And then you're going to see what's underneath it. So the ability, that's the only material, the VITA 3D system is the only material ever made where you can control your translucency of the work also. But just because a bottle says base dentine and the other one says dentine or transpadentine, whatever, you can mix the two together, 50-50, 75-25, and then you have a third translucency that you can use. So if I have a 6-unit bridge and I have a lateral sticking out or a canine in, whatever, I can mix these percentages because I know them in my head now, but it took me a while. And then when you build it up, you can say, well, I need more value in this one, or I need a little more intensity here. So I would build the canine up with a mixture of whatever base dentines if I don't have a lot of room, and then I just put enamel on top. I don't need the dentine. In other cases, right, I would do different. Okay.
So just to clarify, for the VM9, for the VITA materials, there is a effect liner, a set of what are called effect liners that are very highly fluorescent that can be used as the bonder, but also any other porcelain, whether it's shaded, base dentin, transpadentin, even enamels, could be used for a bonder layer, a specific wash, what we call a wash coat. So your thoughts on cutting a retention groove on the internal axial walls for retention. I don't know if we need to clarify that question or not.
If you're gonna do a retention groove, it should not be very narrow. It needs to be rounded. You can't just go in there with a diamond and like an old attachment or something, or a gold crown where you could have parallel things, because that really would wreak havoc on fitting sometimes. Now, if the retention is because the prep is too tapered and there's no retention, the margins are going to hit first before the crown is fully seated. It's what the doctors have to understand. I mean, there may not be enough tooth structure to do this, but you need a fairly parallel prep with some tapering. And you see, if you have that and you have a nice smooth occlusal table, not a lunar landscape occlusal table, the most important thing is the lab should not be blocking out too much of this occlusal ugliness with Duralay or Zap It or something like that and say, oh, look how beautiful this is. Because what happens is when that crown goes to the mouth, the margins hit before the crown is seated. And it'll dance around on the margins like this. And if they push hard, you'll see a crack go up on glass ceramics. And on the zirconia material, they're going to tell you it doesn't fit, it's too loose, I need a retention groove and all that. And a lot of times it's because they have a really bad occlusal table and there's been too much blocking out done. And unless that table seats down, the margins can't go anywhere. If you've got too much space, the margins engage first and the crown wiggles and they think it's loose. And so I don't accept that. I tell them you need to block this stuff out. If it's too rough, I can't do it. Because the machine, look, when the scanner says And you know this. I'll be 70 in October. I have friends with boats and friends with scanners. And so when I see what they're doing and the stuff that comes into the lab, I'm saying to myself, wow. So the machine is compensating for this ugly prep. And I did a timer. I put a timer on a really ugly occlusal table where the doctor had dug out the decay or whatever, but he didn't have this nice smooth whatever. And then the machine was laboring, trying to fit in all these little holes. And I'm recording this, and it's going like this. And we did another one that was nice and smooth. The machine would go. It took a lot faster to mill out a nice prep than a crappy prep. No sharp angles, rounded. They've never learned that over the years. Unfortunately, there's some do, but you can't leave a sharp edge because the machine says the burr can't get in there when I mill, so I'm going to poof it out, and that causes the crown not to fit right, and it feels loose. So the whole idea is you have to train the dentist. If you're a dentist asking, you got to round the preps. If it's a lab technician, prep a die and say, this is what I need. Or take them a burr, the smallest burr you got, and say, if you send me an impression with an incisal edge narrower than this, I can't do it. Because it's going to create too much of a space inside the crown, and that's where the back fits come in.
Yep, it'll over mill. So another related to a finish line on an anterior micro layered restoration, do you make the finish line onto the lingual of the incisal edge or right at the incisal edge?
It depends on the occlusion of the patient. If you have a person that's more of a bruxer, the angle of eminentia will tell you everything. So if you have a steep angle of eminentia, this patient will open and close like a rabbit or a horse. They don't have a lot of translative movement. Me, I'm more like a bulldog. So my teeth are wearing flat. So if I had a finish line and I had overextension of the porcelain and I did too hard of a protrusive movement, if you leave those teeth long where they're not meshing, you can have really crooked teeth, but nature works its way and protects them. I'd like to do, depending on the occlusion, I'll tell Graham, we'll get on the team viewer and say we need a finish line. The incisal edge needs to be in zirconia. Now, what's the danger? If the doctor didn't take the right bite, the buccal bite or whatever bite he takes, and you think you have this on a good articulator, and the next thing you know, you say, I got to extend a millimeter. You can't do it. So you can do a micro line. You see, the biggest problem, it's not just the finish line, it's how wide the zirconia is. So when you're trying to match a beautiful anterior tooth that's full of beautiful effects and translucency, that zirconia, if it's too wide, it's like a backdrop and the light's not going to get through it the same way as just an enamel wraparound on that 2 to 3 millimeters from the incisal edge down is where everything's happening in a tooth. And so I do, the safe way is to do like that framework that I showed in 3 pieces where the incisal edge is in zirconia. Remember, we try in the PMMA crowns, and we make sure that those are right there. The bite is good, excursions and everything, and then we go back, we either add or take away, and then we ask, rescan this, and this is what we need. And that's how we do it. So that way, it's sort of like a try-in of a PMMA. And we also try to use a PMMA that's a very similar color to the final shade. We had a patient a week or so ago, we've been treating her for a while, and she wanted a bleach shade. And I asked the lab to do we did 2 sets, one with bleach shade and one with a 1M1 or A1, I can't remember, I think it was A1. And when we put in those white ones, she says, oh no, these look too big. And I said, well, they're the same size. I said, but you have to remember, everything that's white is very reflective, and they appear larger. So you can have physically, I always tell people I'm 6 feet, like 240. And if I make a statue of myself in clear resin and another one in white plaster, I'm going to look bigger in the white plaster because the light's going right through the crown. So a lot of times people that say, oh, well, this is too big looking. That's because you chose too light of a shade. An A4 and an A1 that are the same physical shade have totally different optical shape. So you have the optical shape and the optical size of an object, and you have the physical shape and the physical size of an object. So that is a big problem in shade selection, where somebody wants to have these white teeth all the time or whatever, and that's fine if they want to do that. They bleach the heck out of it, and then they become purple. So it's like a D1 shade, which is what I actually have one that I made that looks got a little bit more violet than a D2, but that's what over bleaching does. And you can't really find it on a shade guide. So it's the opposite of white. When you over bleach, it becomes bluish. So this finish line issue is the backdrop of the zirconia is going to make it appear wider than it is. But if you can get the finish line, to me, that's more occlusal related, where you go forward and it's protected. If you don't have that and it trips up too much, you can chip it. There's certainly more chipping on overhanging porcelain than when zirconia is on the edge. No question about that.
We've got one more question here. It's a common question that's often asked when regarding pink and tooth-colored porcelain. When you layer a zirconia bridge and you're doing gingiva in porcelain, do you layer the two porcelains, the pink porcelain and the tooth porcelain, shaded porcelain, at the same time, or do you do one first and then the other?
When I do the build-up, I get the framework and I fire the bonder on the framework, and I would use pink porcelain as the bonder, a good solid one. Now, depending on the length of the tissue where it goes, if it's a canine eminence, the tissue in the mouth looks a little bit lighter than a dark pink next to it. So you have high pink and low pink. So you almost have a bony look. So I use the 231, which is a bony looking for the Lumex material. And I put that on the framework. And then when you put the pink on top, it looks just like what it does in nature. But I mix the tissue with translucent. But I do build up the bonding layer first, pink where pink is supposed to go. Make sure the papillas are the right side. And then I measure, then I go ahead and do the porcelain buildup on the anterior, and I roll the interproximals in. I don't even cut them in. So if you have an interproximal, it needs to be U-shaped. And so the porcelain comes in here to this one and here to this one. If you just do it too narrow, it'll tear. You don't want that. You need to open the interproximals like that so that it comes in here and here, and the only place it's touching is by the connector, so it's not going to tear all over the place. Then I go ahead and do the second bake, and then I put in my papilla, like the dark color in the center of the papilla, and I work my way up with another color mixed with clear. And then around the teeth themselves, I use a very translucent mix, because in nature, if you have a young or healthy person, you can see the tooth underneath a free gingiva, that's called. And then after I do 2 bakes on that and I have my tissue established and I smooth everything out, then I take my paste stains, believe it or not, the pink, light pink and dark pink, and a little violet, and then I make little streaks like that to reproduce the capillaries and whatever the heck else is in there, and I try to blend that in. And then the last bake I do is I put the clear porcelain on the bottom of the ponic. And that way, when you touch it, it's like a contact lens, and it really looks good.
All right. Well,
it takes me about 4 bakes to do that. It's not easy. You got to charge for that.
Of course, got to make money.
That's right.
All right. Well, Felix, greatly appreciate you helping us out with this webinar today. As you can see on the screen, if you need to get a hold of Felix, please go ahead and do so. You can also contact us here at the help desk. Thanks for attending, everyone. Felix, any last words to the audience as we close out?
Go get them. Go get them.
All right.
Yeah, just read those articles if you want. If you're curious enough, I mean, there's a lot of really good information. And by the way, a lot of the sourcing on most of those articles I read, you could see Dr. Giordano's name popping up there with, as far as the references are done. So thank you, Russell, for everything. And then you guys get a hold of me. You can email me. Just tell me who you are because I don't know you. And so I need to know, and that way just tell me who you are and what question it is. I'll try to get back.
We know you screen you screen your numbers in your emails.
I do. I got one today that I owed somebody $304. Thank you for your order, PayPal, whatever. And I don't even have PayPal, nothing. So they're trying to scam me. So whatever. But yeah, I do screen my phone calls. I always ask people to text me first, say, hey, I'm so and so, dental lab or doctor, whatever. Do you have a moment? And if I can call you back right then and there, I'm pretty good about getting back quickly, unless I'm seeing a patient or something or hanging around with my grandkids. That's always fun.
Yeah, they are.
Anyway, well, I appreciate you guys taking your lunch time to watch this. I'm going to go grab a bite now as soon as we leave.
All right.
I got to maintain my energy reserve for my ultra marathons. You see that? That's what that is.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Eat some high protein. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Felix. Greatly appreciate your time and all the effort that you put into this webinar and all the information that you've let us all have. So thank you very much. This will conclude today's webinar. Thank you.
Bye now.